The last time I saw my father breathe, his hand still had marks from the belt he used on me. I studied anatomy for months to know exactly where to apply pressure. How long does it take for a man like him to stop struggling? 3 minutes and 20 seconds. I counted every second. When I finished, I turned on the camera I had hidden in the room and spoke directly into it. Now you'll see what he did to me for 15 years. The video I left behind wasn't a confession. It was my defense. My name is Paul, I'm 19 now. When you hear my story in the news, they only tell the part that sells, "Teenager kills his own father." They love repeating that phrase. What they never mention is why. Nobody asks what drives a kid to plan something like this. Nobody wants to know what happens inside a home when the doors close. I spent 2 years in juvenile detention. I got out a few months ago. My story became a case study, a debate topic on TV shows, special report material. Everyone has an opinion about me without ever looking me in the eyes. To some, I'm a monster. To others, a symbol. The truth is more complicated. I'm sitting in this empty park because it's the only place where I can breathe without feeling like the walls are closing in. I still wake up every night with the same nightmare. My father entering my room. The difference is that now when I wake up, I know he'll never enter again. I'm not here to justify myself or ask for forgiveness. I just want to tell what really happened, what no news program showed, what nobody wanted to hear. I want you to understand how a son can reach the point of taking his own father's life and still sleep peacefully afterward. If you're really paying attention to me, if you can see beyond what others show, I need you to like this video right now, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you don't miss any accounts like mine, and comment where you're watching from. I want to know who's on the other side. Who are the people who really want to understand? Because what I'm about to tell you will change how you see everything. It'll make you wonder how many houses on your street hide stories like mine. And believe me, what I did wasn't even remotely the scariest part of this story. The real horror was in the 15 years that came before. I was born in a small house in the outskirts of Detroit. My mother, Lucy, worked as a nursing assistant at the county hospital. My father, Robert, was a security guard at a mall. In the early years, we were what people would call a normal family. We had little money, but in the photos from that time, everyone is smiling. I was about 5 years old sitting on my father's shoulders while he walked around the house. I remember the smell of coffee in the kitchen in the morning and my mother's voice singing while she packed my backpack for school. Robert, my father, had a side he showed to the world. He was respected in the neighborhood, greeted everyone on the street, helped elderly ladies carry their groceries. People said he was a good guy. At the mall where he worked, he even received Employee of the Month certificates 3 times. At home, in the early years, he played with me, taught me how to play baseball, took me fishing on the weekends. He had large, rough hands and a laugh that made the walls shake. Everything started to change when I was 7 years old. The mall where my father worked closed down, and he became unemployed. At first, he would go out every day with his resume under his arm. He'd come back late, tired, but still smiling. After 3 months, the smiles began to diminish. After 6 months, they stopped completely. My mother started working overtime at the hospital to compensate. She left earlier and came back later. And I stayed home alone with my father, who now spent his days drinking. At first, it was just beer. Then it turned into whiskey. The first time he hit me, I had broken a glass in the kitchen. I was trying to help, wash the dishes before he woke up. The sound of breaking glass brought him off the couch. He came into the kitchen stumbling, looked at the floor, and then at me. "You're good for nothing, aren't you?" It was the first time I heard that phrase. It wouldn't be the last. The slap came quickly, stinging my face. I stood there, not understanding. My mother came home from work and saw the red mark. My father said I had fallen in the backyard. She believed him, or pretended to. Things got worse when I turned 9. My father finally got a job as a night security guard at a parking lot. But instead of improving, the situation got worse. He worked at night and slept during the day. Any noise irritated him. I learned to walk on tiptoe around the house, to close doors without making a sound, to breathe more quietly. My mother began to notice the bruises. Once she asked about the purple marks on my arm. Before I could answer, my father appeared in the doorway. The kid's been getting into fights at school, too weak to defend himself. My mother looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I remained silent. She lowered her eyes and left the room. That's when I understood I was alone. At school, my fourth-grade teacher, Mrs. Harrison, noticed that I was always tired, always hurt. One day she called me after class. "Paul, is everything okay at home?" It was the first time anyone had asked. I almost told her, but I remembered what my father said. "What happens at home stays at home. If you open your mouth, they'll take you to a place where kids get beaten much worse." So I lied to Mrs. Harrison. I said everything was fine, that I just fell a lot because I was clumsy. At 12, I tried to live with my paternal grandmother, Grandma Irene. She lived alone since my grandfather died and always said she wanted company. One Sunday, when my father was less aggressive, I mentioned the idea. Grandma Irene said I could stay with her for a while, help her around the house. He looked at me for a long time, then smiled. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You want to go tell the old lady what life is like here? Want to gossip about your own father?" That night, he locked me in my room without dinner. The next day, he called my grandmother, saying I couldn't visit anymore because I had low grades and needed to study. Over the years, Robert developed methods to hurt me without leaving visible marks. He learned quickly. He discovered that hitting with a wet towel didn't leave bruises, that ear pulling could be painful without leaving evidence, that pushes against the wall, if well calculated, only hurt inside. "Nobody will believe you," he'd say. "I'm a respected worker. You're just a troubled kid." At 13, I had my first panic attack at school. I was in gym class when the teacher yelled at me for missing a basketball pass. The yell reminded me of my father. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. I fell to my knees, shaking. I was taken to the nurse's office. The school psychologist, Dr. Mitchell, started calling me in for weekly conversations. She asked questions, showed drawings. I answered with well-rehearsed lies. One day, Dr. Mitchell called my parents in for a meeting. My father showed up clean, shaved, smiling. He talked about how I was a sensitive boy, how he was worried about me, how he worked hard to give me a better life. Dr. Mitchell smiled, charmed by that dedicated father. On the way home in the car, he kept the smile until we turned the corner. Then his voice changed. "If you keep drawing attention like this, I'll have to teach you a lesson you'll never forget." That night, I learned what true terror was. My mother began to be more absent, not just physically but emotionally too. She saw the signs, heard the screams at night, noticed my growing silence but chose to look the other way. Years later, I discovered she was having an affair with a doctor at the hospital. She was building her escape route, but without me. When I turned 15, my mother announced she was leaving us. She packed her bags one Sunday while my father was at a friend's house drinking and watching football. She hugged me at the door with tears in her eyes. "I'll send money every month," she said. "When I get settled, I'll come back for you." I never saw her again. The money arrived regularly, but she never came back. I later discovered she had moved to Portland with the doctor, had another child, built another family, one without stains from the previous one. With her departure, I lost my last barrier of protection. My father blamed me. "She left because of you," he'd say as he beat me. "Nobody can stand a son like you." The period between my 15th and 16th years was when true hell set in. With my mother gone, my father didn't have to pretend anymore. There was no longer any need to hide marks or lower the volume. Our house became a prison, and he was the only guard. He developed a routine of terror. Before leaving for work, he'd lock the refrigerator with a padlock so you don't waste food. He'd leave only a pack of crackers and a bottle of water on the table. When he returned, he'd make me show that I hadn't eaten anything beyond what was allowed. If he suspected I had found food somehow, he'd force me to kneel on uncooked rice for hours. At school, I began stealing food from the cafeteria. I'd keep it in my pocket to eat secretly at home. Once the lunch lady caught me putting bread in my backpack. Instead of reporting me, she took me to the kitchen and prepared a lunchbox. "Take this, boy." It was one of the few acts of kindness I received in those years, but even this small comfort was destroyed when my father found the lunchbox in my room. He dragged me by my hair to the kitchen, threw the food in the trash, and forced me to watch as he poured dish soap over it to ensure I couldn't retrieve it later. Robert started drinking more heavily. He'd come home at 7 a.m. after the night shift, already drunk. He'd wake me up shouting, demanding that the house be clean, that breakfast be ready. If something wasn't the way he wanted, punishment was immediate. One morning I dropped a cup of coffee I was serving him. The hot liquid splashed on his leg. He stood up in one motion, grabbed me by the neck, and pinned me against the wall. "You did that on purpose, didn't you?" His eyes were bloodshot. His breath smelled of alcohol and hatred. "No, Dad, it was an accident." "I swear," I managed to say while trying to breathe. He squeezed harder until black spots began to dance in my vision. Then suddenly, he let go. I fell to the floor, coughing and choking. He backed away, grabbed his car keys. "Clean up this mess. When I get back, we'll finish our conversation." I spent the entire day trembling, waiting. He only came back the next morning, so drunk he could barely walk. He fell on the couch and slept. It was the first time I wished he wouldn't wake up. At school, my grades plummeted. I couldn't concentrate. I slept in classes because I spent the night awake, afraid. The guidance counselor called me in for a talk. "Paul, you were a good student. What's happening?" I opened my mouth to speak, but the words didn't come out. The fear was greater. "Problems at home," was all I could say. She nodded as if she understood but didn't ask any more questions. She gave me a deadline to improve my grades and sent me back to class. Another adult who preferred not to see the obvious. At 16, I started working part-time at an auto shop near home. The owner, Mr. Anthony, was a 60-year-old man who needed someone to do light work and attend to customers. The salary was small, but it gave me an excuse to stay away from home. My father allowed it because I handed over all the money to him at the end of the month. "At least you're good for something now," he'd say as he counted the bills. Mr. Anthony noticed something was wrong. Once, when I was changing shirts in the back of the shop, he saw the marks on my back. Old scars, new bruises. He stood in the doorway watching me. "Who did this to you, kid?" I lowered my eyes, embarrassed. "I fell off my bike," I mumbled the rehearsed excuse. He shook his head. "No bike makes marks like those." That day, he let me leave early and gave me a sandwich to take with me. The next day, when I arrived for work, I found a mattress pad and a pillow in the back room of the shop. "If you need a place to stay some night," was all he said. It was the first time I felt I had an option, a way out. One Saturday night, my father came home especially drunk. He had lost money gambling. He was furious. He started breaking things around the house, shouting that my mother and I had ruined his life. I tried to hide in my room, but he broke down the door. "Today you're going to learn once and for all," he said, taking off his belt. I ran to the kitchen looking for a way out. He caught up with me, threw me to the floor. The first belt strike hit my back, the second my arms that I was using to protect myself. On the third, I managed to get up and run to the front door. He came after me, stumbling over his own feet. I ran down the street without looking back until I reached Mr. Anthony's shop. I spent 3 nights sleeping on that mattress pad. Mr. Anthony didn't ask questions, just brought me food and let me stay. On the 4th day, he sat down beside me. "You need to report this, son. This can't continue." I shook my head. "Nobody will believe me, and if they do, they'll send me to a shelter. They say in those places it's worse." Mr. Anthony sighed. "So what are you going to do?" I had no answer. I ended up going back home. My father acted as if nothing had happened. He didn't even mention the fact that I had disappeared for days. He just said, "Next time you run away, I'll come after you, and it won't be good when I find you." That's when I realized I would never be safe as long as he was alive. I started observing him more carefully, studying his patterns. On payday, he drank more, became completely unconscious, vulnerable. It was when I could breathe a little, knowing he wouldn't suddenly wake up. I began formulating a plan. First, I needed evidence. No one would believe just my word against his. I used the money I hid, a small portion of my salary that I managed to conceal before handing over the rest, to buy a used small camera that could be hidden. I installed it in my room behind a stack of books. I recorded for weeks, the screams, the blows, the humiliations. It was painful knowing that it was being recorded, that it would exist forever, but I knew I needed it. In parallel, I began studying, not at school where my grades remained low, but at home, in secret. Anatomy books I borrowed from the library, articles on the internet that I read when I stayed at the internet cafe after work. I wanted to understand exactly how the human body worked, and how it stopped working. My initial plan was simple: wait until he drank himself unconscious and then use one of the kitchen knives. But the more I researched, the more I realized it would be messy, unpredictable. I needed something cleaner, more certain, something that would look natural. I researched poisons, but most left traces. Besides, I wanted to look into his eyes when it happened. I wanted him to know why. Then, in one of my searches, I found an article about strangulation, about how pressure on the right points of the throat could cut blood flow to the brain in seconds, how the person would lose consciousness quickly with little chance to fight back, how it was almost impossible to leave external marks if done correctly. It was perfect. I spent months practicing the technique on pillows, on improvised mannequins, studying the pressure points, the necessary force, the exact time. I knew I would only have one chance. Meanwhile, things at home were getting worse. My father lost his security job for showing up drunk to work. He started staying home all the time, drinking from early on. The money I brought from the shop and what my mother sent barely covered the bills and his alcohol. Food became a luxury. I lost so much weight that my schoolmates started making jokes about me being sick. One night, he came into my room while I was sleeping. He was drunker than usual. He was holding a lit cigarette. "Let's see if you can stay quiet," he said, bringing the glowing tip closer to my arm. The smell of burning flesh made me vomit. He laughed. "Too weak, just like your mother." That night, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. The plan was ready. The evidence was collected. The camera was charged for the final act. I was 17 years old and had nothing to lose. The day I chose wasn't random. It was my mother's birthday. A day my father always celebrated in his own way, drinking until he passed out and reminding me with shouts how she had abandoned us. I knew he would follow the same pattern as always. He would start early with beer, move on to whiskey in the mid-afternoon, and by about 9 p.m. would be incoherent enough for any normal person to go to sleep. But not him. He always sought me out first. It was part of the ritual. That morning began like any other. I got up before him, made coffee, cleaned the kitchen. When he woke up, he was already on his second beer. He looked at me with that familiar disdain. "What are you looking at? Is there something on my face?" I lowered my eyes, as I always did. "No, Dad. Just came to see if you need anything." He let out a dry laugh. "Now you're a concerned son?" Too late for that. I went to school but couldn't concentrate on anything. The math teacher called my attention twice for staring out the window. On the third time, she sent me out of the classroom. I sat in the hallway thinking about what I was about to do. I didn't feel fear or guilt, just a strange sense of calm, as if I were observing everything from outside my own body. At the shop, Mr. Anthony noticed I was different. "Everything okay with you, Paul?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Just tired." He looked at me for a long time, as if he knew something was wrong. "If you need to talk, I'm here." I almost told him. I almost asked for help. But then I remembered all the other times I had asked for help and how nobody really helped. Nobody could protect me from Robert. Only I could do that. I went home early that day. I told Mr. Anthony I had a headache. In reality, I needed to prepare everything. When I arrived, my father was already on the couch, surrounded by empty beer cans, watching some game show on TV. He barely looked at me when I entered. I went straight to my room. I positioned the camera strategically, adjusted the angle to capture most of the room. I tested it to make sure it was working. Then, I put my plan into action. The first part was to make him drink faster than normal. This was easy. I just had to provoke him in the right way. I went back to the living room, stood in front of the TV. "Get out of the way, kid." "Dad, I need to tell you something." He sighed, irritated. What is it now? I got a call from Mom today. It was a lie, of course, but it was enough. His eyes immediately changed, gaining that dangerous gleam that I knew so well. What did that bitch want? She said she's going to stop sending money, that you just drink it all anyway. He stood up in one motion, more agile than I expected for someone who had drunk so much. She said that, and you... What did you say to her about me? Nothing, Dad, The slap came fast, catching me on the right side of the face. I staggered backward more by habit than from pain. I had learned to back away even before the blow to reduce the impact. You've been talking shit about me to your mother? Is that it? Conspiring behind my back? No, Dad, I swear. He grabbed me by the shirt, pulled me close. His breath was a toxic mixture of alcohol and cigarettes. You're just like her, a traitor. He released me with a push, went back to the couch, grabbed another beer, opened it with a snap. Get out of my sight. I went back to my room, closed the door. My heart was pounding hard, but not from fear. It was adrenaline. The first part of the plan had worked. He was drinking faster now, furious. He would soon move on to the whiskey. At 7 p.m., I heard the familiar sound of the bottle being opened. At 8, he was already shouting at the TV, arguing with himself. At 9, as predicted, silence fell over the house. I waited another half hour to be sure. When I came out of my room, he was on the couch, his head fallen back, his mouth half open, snoring, the whiskey bottle almost empty on the table. It would be so easy to do it right there. But no, I needed him to be in my territory, under the camera's surveillance. Dad, I called, gently shaking his shoulder. Dad, wake up. He mumbled, opened his heavy eyes. What? There's someone at the door asking for you. I think it's from work. It was a lie, but he was too drunk to notice. He struggled to get up, staggered. Work at this hour? Said it's urgent, something about payment. He tried to compose himself, running his hand through his greasy hair, straightening his wrinkled shirt. Money was always the only subject that got his immediate attention, no matter how drunk he was. Where is he? I told him to wait in my room. I was embarrassed by the mess in the living room. He nodded as if that made sense. He followed me down the hall, stumbling over his own feet. When we reached my room, he looked around, confused. Where is he? Must have gone to the bathroom. Wait here. I closed the door behind me. I verified that the camera was recording, the red light blinking discreetly behind the books. I returned to the room. My father was sitting on my bed, his head in his hands, probably trying to control the dizziness. Nobody came, did they? He said suddenly, his voice surprisingly lucid. You lied to me. I didn't answer. He raised his head, looked at me. For a moment, I saw something like clarity in his eyes. What are you planning, Paul? It was the first time in years he had said my name without it being followed by an insult. Don't you realize what you've done to me all these years, Dad? He frowned. What are you talking about? About the bruises, the scars, the nights I spent hungry because you locked up the food, the times you burned me with cigarettes, the beatings you gave me until I passed out? He stood up, wobbling. You're crazy. I just disciplined you. It's a father's duty. That's not discipline, Dad. It's torture. He took a step toward me, his face red with anger. Now you're calling me a torturer after everything I did for you. I should have abandoned you along with your mother. He advanced to hit me, but he was too slow from the alcohol. I dodged easily. Years of practice had made me good at this. This ends today, I said, surprisingly calm. He laughed, an ugly, disdainful laugh. And what are you going to do, hit me? You can't even kill a fly, you weakling. I didn't answer, just waited. He advanced again, more determined this time. He managed to grab my arm, pulled me hard. I'm going to teach you to respect your father. That was the moment. As he pulled me, I twisted my body in the way I had practiced so many times. I used his own momentum against him. In one fluid motion, I was behind him, my arms around his neck. Not on the trachea. That would be strangulation by asphyxiation, it would leave marks. But on the carotid arteries, one on each side of the neck, perfect pressure, exactly as I had studied. His eyes widened in surprise. He tried to struggle, but I had positioned my body in such a way that he couldn't reach me. His movements quickly lost strength as the blood flow to his brain was interrupted. "What are you?" he tried to say, his voice already weak. "I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago." I maintained constant, controlled pressure. He continued to struggle for a few seconds, but with less and less force. I saw the exact moment his eyes lost focus. When his body went limp, I started counting. I couldn't release him too soon. 1, 2, 3, up to 200 seconds. 3 minutes and 20 seconds exactly, as I had researched. Enough time to ensure irreversible brain damage, even if someone found him soon after. When I finally let him go, he fell to the floor like a sandbag, with no reflexes, no breathing. I stood looking at him for a long time. The man who had been my terror for so many years now seemed small, harmless, pathetic. I felt neither euphoria nor guilt, just peace. A silence I had never experienced before. I approached the camera, adjusted the angle to show the body on the floor. I looked directly into the lens and spoke with a calmness that surprised me. "My name is Paul. I'm 17. The man on the floor is Robert, my father. For 15 years, he physically and psychologically tortured me. I have the evidence recorded on this same camera, days and days of abuse. I'm not asking for forgiveness or understanding. I'm just telling my version of the story, the version nobody wanted to hear while he was alive." I turned off the camera. I knew what I needed to do next. I took my cell phone and called the police. When they answered, my voice was firm. "I want to report a death." "Oak Street, 2187. My father, he's not breathing." The operator asked several questions. I answered them all truthfully. "Yes, I was with him. No, I didn't try resuscitation. I don't know what happened. He was drinking a lot." That was partially true. "Yes, I'll wait here." While waiting, I copied all the videos from the camera to a flash drive, the months of abuse and the final scene. I wrote a letter explaining everything. I put it together with the flash drive in an envelope. I addressed it to the only person who had shown any real concern for me, Mr. Anthony. I hid the envelope under the mattress. I knew the police would eventually search the room, but not immediately. I planned to ask a school friend to retrieve it and deliver it later. The police arrived in 20 minutes. They were accompanied by paramedics who quickly confirmed the death. The officers separated me, started asking questions. I kept the story simple. He had drunk a lot, as he always did. I was in my room, heard a noise, found him fallen. No, I didn't see what happened. They didn't seem to suspect immediately. After all, I was just a skinny teenager with a fragile appearance. My father was a strong man, almost twice my size. The scene didn't suggest a struggle, and the smell of alcohol on the body was strong enough to suggest a natural death related to drinking, but I knew this would change when the autopsy was performed. I had no illusions that I would escape. That was never the plan. The plan was to ensure that when I was caught, the world would understand why. 3 days later, while I was at the police station giving more statements, the police received an anonymous envelope. Inside, a flash drive, the same one I had hidden under the mattress, which a school friend had retrieved at my request. But I had made one more copy and sent it directly to the largest newspaper in the city. The content went viral in hours, edited excerpts of the videos showing the abuse I suffered for years. My final testimony, explaining why I did what I did. Suddenly, it was no longer just the case of a son who killed his father. It was the story of a teenager who suffered years of abuse and was ignored by everyone around him. I was detained, of course. The autopsy confirmed death by strangulation. My case went through the juvenile court since I was 17. The judge considered the extraordinary circumstances. The videos served as evidence of years of systematic abuse. Witnesses emerged. Neighbors who heard the screams, schoolmates who saw the bruises, even my 4th-grade teacher, who admitted having suspected but not having done enough. In the end, I was sentenced to 2 years in a juvenile detention center, the minimum possible sentence, considering the seriousness of the act. But the judge recognized the exceptional circumstances of the case. During the reading of the sentence, he looked directly at me and said, "The system failed you repeatedly. This does not justify taking a life, but it certainly explains how we got here." When I left the courtroom, there were people with posters outside. "Justice for Paul." Where were you when he was asking for help? It was strange to see strangers defending my act, turning my pain into a cause. I didn't feel like a hero or a victim, just someone who had done the only thing that seemed possible after exhausting all other options. The case became a national discussion point about domestic abuse against children and teenagers. Experts debated on TV shows. Psychologists analyzed my behavior. Social workers used my story as an example of the need for greater attention to the signs. My name and face were everywhere, an involuntary celebrity born from tragedy. Meanwhile, I just waited for my time to pass behind the bars of a juvenile center, watching from a distance the circus that my life had become. The 2 years I spent in the juvenile detention center were a strange interval in my life. For the first time, I had 3 guaranteed meals a day. A place to sleep without fear of being awakened by screams or blows, routine, predictability, things I never had at home. At first, the other inmates treated me like a celebrity. They had all seen the videos, knew my story. "The guy who killed his abusive father," they said, with a mixture of admiration and caution. Some wanted to hear details as if it were an adventure story. Others kept their distance, perhaps fearing that someone capable of planning something like that for months was too dangerous to approach. The center's psychologists tried to make me talk about what I felt: guilt, remorse, anger, anything. But the truth is that I didn't feel much. There was an emptiness where emotion should have been, as if I had spent everything I had in those years of survival, and now there was nothing left. "You're in denial," said Dr. Camilla, my assigned psychologist, after weeks of trying to make me cry or shout or show any strong reaction. "It's normal after such prolonged trauma." "I'm not denying anything," I replied. "I know exactly what I did and would do it again." It was the wrong answer, of course. Here it indicated that I wasn't recovered, wasn't remorseful, but it was the only truth I had to offer. Eventually, I began to understand that they needed something specific from me, a recovery script with all the right steps. So I learned to give them what they wanted. I cried in sessions, talked about nightmares I didn't have, wrote forgiveness letters to a man I didn't forgive. And slowly I saw the evaluations improve, the reports become more positive. Meanwhile, I continued my studies. I managed to finish high school within the center with surprisingly good grades. I discovered that, without the constant terror at home, I could concentrate on classes. Reading became a refuge. I devoured any book I could get from the center's limited library: history, science, literature, anything to fill the time and occupy my mind. The notoriety of my case had an unexpected effect. People began to write me letters, other abuse victims who identified with my story. Concerned parents, confused teenagers. There were even fan clubs on social networks, something I only discovered when one of the monitors casually commented. "You've become a symbol," he said, showing me a newspaper article where my case was cited in a bill to increase protection for minors who are victims of domestic violence. People are calling it the Paul Law. It was strange to think that my personal tragedy had transformed into something bigger, that perhaps other children wouldn't need to reach the extreme that I reached, because someone was finally paying attention. During those 2 years, I never received a visit from my mother. I knew from news reports that she had given some interviews at the beginning, crying on TV, saying she didn't know, that if she had noticed, she would have done something. It was the convenient lie she needed to tell herself. I didn't blame her, not entirely. She had also been a victim of Robert in different ways, but she had made her choice, and I had made mine. Mr. Anthony came to visit me regularly. At first, I thought it would be out of guilt. Maybe he felt he could have prevented everything if he had acted earlier. But over time, I realized it was more than that. He really cared. He brought books, told me how things were at the shop, talked about the outside world, without judging what I had done to end up inside. "I have a plan," he told me in one of his last visits before my release. "When you get out, there's a place at the shop waiting for you and a room in the back if you need it. No questions, no charges. It was the first time I really cried since it all happened. Not in the therapy sessions, not during the trial, not on the lonely nights in the cell, but there, before the sincere offer of a fresh start, something broke inside me. Maybe it was the beginning of what psychologists called emotional processing, or maybe it was just the recognition that I finally had a real option. On the day I was released at 19, there were reporters at the center's door. They wanted the exclusive story, the first interview with the boy who killed his abusive father after serving his sentence. I passed by them without answering, my head down, going straight to the car where Mr. Anthony was waiting. "It will pass," he said, as he drove away, the reporters left behind. "In a few weeks, they'll find another story to chase." He was right, in part. The coverage gradually diminished, but never completely disappeared. From time to time, someone recognizes me on the street, a look of pity or admiration or fear. It depends on how they interpreted my story. Now, sitting in this empty park, 6 months after my release, I'm still trying to understand who I am beyond the act that defined my life. I work at Mr. Anthony's shop during the day. I take a technical course at night. I have plans to maybe go to college one day. Normal things. Things I never believed I would have the chance to do. I still wake up with nightmares, yes, but they're not about what I did. They're about what was done to me, about the years of terror, not about those final 3 minutes and 20 seconds. That, at least, the psychologist got right. The real trauma wasn't taking a life, but having mine almost destroyed before. People ask me if I regret it. It's a complicated question. Do I regret reaching that point? Yes. Would I have wished for another way out? Absolutely. But given everything that happened, all the closed doors, all the ignored pleas for help, I can't say I would have done differently. What haunts me most isn't what I did, but the fact that it took going to such an extreme for people to notice, that it took a teenager killing his own father for society to look at domestic abuse with the seriousness it deserves. That my pain only became real to the world when I transformed it into violence. That's the real tragedy. Not what happened that night, but the 15 years that came before, the years when I was invisible. I'm still occasionally recognized, still receive letters. I still see my name mentioned in discussions about child abuse. The Paul case, they call it, as if my entire life could be summarized in a single moment, a single act. But I'm learning that I am more than that I can build something beyond that night, that perhaps there is a purpose in having survived it all. If you've made it this far and truly understood everything I've been through, I ask one last favor. Please like this video, subscribe to the Traumatic Accounts channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories like mine. And tell me in the comments what time it is where you're watching this. It seems strange, I know, but I want to get an idea of how many people are really listening, really present in this moment with me. How many people might recognize signs of abuse in children around them before it's too late? Because in the end, that's what this is about. It's not about me or what I did. It's about all the other children who are going through what I went through right now as we speak. Children who are screaming in silence, waiting for someone to notice before they too reach the point of no return. Today I'm trying to find a new identity beyond the boy who killed his father. I'm trying to discover who I would have been if Robert hadn't systematically destroyed every part of me for years. It's a confusing journey. Painful at times, but also liberating. For the first time, I'm living without fear. And perhaps that's the only true happy ending possible for a story like mine. Not justice, because there is no real justice for years of abuse, but the freedom to finally be able to breathe, to finally have the chance to discover who I am without the shadows of the past suffocating me at every moment. So, if there's something I want you to take from this story, it's not a judgment about what I did. It's the understanding that sometimes the most dangerous monster isn't the teenager who commits an extreme act. It's the adult who pushes him to that point, day after day, year after year, until there's no other way out.